So the schoolhouse was important as a schoolhouse. And the main thing that the schoolhouse became important for by the teens and 20s, by the time that I call this the school generation, 1925, the main thing it became important for was learning English. If you were a young kid growing up in El Cerrito and you wanted a job, and the kids were beginning to leave the village for jobs, and families were beginning to leave for jobs because of the Depression, the 1930s, you had to know some English. It was critical that you know some English. You didn't have to be fluent, but you had to know enough to be able to understand directions and do things. So, you know, in the 1900 census, they asked the question, can you speak English? Not one person in El Cerrito out of some 160 could speak English. Not one. 1910, 5 said yes, they could speak English. They were talking to a census enumerator who was asking them these questions in Spanish. And Margarita Quintana of this house was one of those 5 who said, yes, I could speak English. By 1920, about 25 said they could speak English. And it just went up and up. And this was why that school was important, you know, to learn to speak English. Well, of course, to read and to write and to do arithmetic were the other things. So anyway, the early school teachers tended to be men and Spanish, and they were mean, and they would take a ruler and whap you on the knuckles, and I had people tell me about that. The later school teachers, as the years went on, like into the 1930s and 40s, became typically women, not men, and more Anglo women, although there was a mixture of Anglo and Spanish. The last school teacher was a guy named Ray Esquivel. Ray Esquivel was a school teacher in 1951. First job, young kid, out of Las Vegas, comes out to the village, goes back to Las Vegas on weekends, but lives here in the Arianes home during the week. And we got to know Ray Esquivel. And we invited Ray out here. And for one of our 16 field trips, Ray was with us. And we hiked up onto the mesa here. And we sat there, and I had these maps, and Ray was looking at them, and I was asking him about stuff. It was wonderful. And then we went down to the schoolhouse, which at that point was pretty much ruins. And he told us about how he would emphasize reading and how he knew all of his 9 students very well, just where they were in reading, and all morning was spent on reading. Then they'd go out and, you know, they'd have some kind of exercise, and then they'd come back and do some other stuff in the afternoon, and maybe they'd do a little fishing. And after the school day was over, he would go up. He was the appointed postman, and he'd ride his horse up the river for 4 miles, fording it 7 times to get to Villanueva to pick up the mail to bring back to the villagers. And that was kind of his self-assigned job. He was great, but what happened at the end of that school year was the school was closed because they had 9 students, and the county of San Miguel decided they couldn't afford to have a school teacher. So the poor guy had to go on to other schools, and that was the 1 year he taught here.